we're just going to go all out and make something great, like the First National or something like that, because we can build stuff like that from scratch. We can do these great things again. We can actually give people vision of creating just like a stunning city and things we can all kind of look in awe at. We built our cities in the way, if you're a family, you almost have to move to the suburbs unless you're really going to fight it. There's nothing built for you in the city. Not really. And so I want to build family-friendly stuff that makes living in the city wonderful, safe, beautiful, in a real community.
Welcome to the Community Center from Eryngo Urbanism, a show about bringing people together in beautiful places that people care about, generation after generation. I'm Kyler. I'll be your host for today. I'm an architect and design communicator based out of Oklahoma City. Today, I'm joined by a very special guest who will be helping us to answer the question, how can we build better buildings that will last longer than most of the buildings that we're building today? Austin Tunnell, welcome to the show. Could you start us out by telling us a bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thanks, Kyler. Glad to be on here and chatting with you. I run a vertically integrated development company, and that's really been born out of 8 years of design build, and we specialize in traditional masonry details, and I imagine we might get into that a little bit. I started off with a different background of a CPA and ended up apprenticing for a master mason for a couple years 10 years ago. So that's really informed everything we've done since then. And as you just mentioned, we are all about building multi-century buildings, and that's not just the buildings themselves. It's also the context of those buildings and the design of those buildings, because people take care of things that are beautiful over time. So we care a lot about building places for people. And that's really, I would say, the theme of what we do. In the heart of what we do is building places for people. And so we've been doing design build, whether that's spec homes, residential homes, small commercial, and small developments. And now we're moving into what I would call larger neighborhood developments, where we're taking an acre and doing an infill of 20 townhomes and mixed use integrated into that. So that's what we've been up to these past couple of years and have a number of exciting projects coming up.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I think we have to start out by talking about structural masonry, because I think that's one of the things that originally piqued my interest in your work as well. Is as an architect, none of the buildings that you see built today are usually structural with their masonry. They'll be structural steel with brick veneer or something. Tell me about how you got started into that world and what kinds of things you've learned along the way.
Structural masonry is super cool, and it's a really old tech, you could say. It's been around for thousands of years. The Romans really popularized structural masonry, brick masonry in particular, but there's masonry well before that. The pyramids are built out of structural masonry, in the sense that the structure itself is the masonry, where the walls become thick enough of masonry, whether stone or brick, that they kind of become self-stabilizing. So you don't need steel, you don't need wood behind them. And the reason it's a really cool practice is all the oldest buildings in the world are built of some kind of structural masonry. All the buildings still standing 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago. Most of Europe has been built out of some form of structural masonry. Much of the early U.S. was built out of a lot of structural masonry, which I hope we can talk about in a little bit. But I got started. I grew up in the suburbs of Houston, and I remember traveling in college and a little after college and going to Spain and Portugal and Italy and seeing all these incredible buildings. I didn't understand, because I didn't come from an architecture background, what is different about these things. Not only the beauty, but stuff that, I was walking through streets and cities that have been standing for 500 years, or 2,000 years, and going, what makes this different? And also this kind of like depth to the buildings that I didn't understand or even have the language to articulate. Well, it turned out that a lot of that is made possible by structural masonry. And I kind of found this out after I had left my CPA job and went off into the jungles of Panama for this free internship, and happened while I was there to meet this master mason from the US. He just happened to be there, master mason who was building new construction structural masonry, brick masonry homes. And what I had learned as I started looking into this and getting kind of obsessed with this idea is we stopped building structural masonry ultimately after World War II, and started asking myself, what are we building today that's going to be around in 100 years, 200 years, 500 years? And I would say nothing we built today is going to be around 500 years from now, probably not 200 years from now. And then tying all this, it's not just durability for durability's sake, starting to understand the values of a durable architecture in terms of, well, if you care about sustainability, what is sustainability in my mind? A sustainable building is an old building, a building that's going to last a really long time that you don't have to tear down, rebuild. Concrete, if it were a nation, would be the third largest greenhouse gas emitter in the world behind the US and China. And so construction durability plays a huge part in sustainability that I feel like we really miss in this industry in terms of talking about that or understanding that. It usually gets pinned down into energy efficiency or something. But then also the cultural value of an architecture that is multi-century, that ties past to present to future, and really is a shared identity for people, because the built world, in my mind, and I know you agree on this, we've talked about this before, but is the human habitat. And we don't really tend to think about it like that, but it is the human habitat. And we, unlike any other creature, get to shape the habitat that we live in. And I think our architecture really is a reflection of our values, as in, just like when you're doing a piece of art, your values go into that thing that you're creating, whether it's music or a painting. The same goes for architecture. When you're on your drive home today, for whoever's listening, drive by and just think to yourself, what were the values that went inside this building and this community? And that will be an interesting thought experiment.
Yeah, I think Jane Jacobs said something about how we desperately need old buildings. I'm curious. So you met this master mason in Panama, and he, if I'm getting my story straight, he brought you to Carlton Landing. Is that the next step in your?
That's how I ended up in Oklahoma, because I'm not from here. My wife's not from here. But when we got back from the Peace Corps, this guy that I met 2.5 years before just stuck in my mind and decided this is what I really want to pursue. And I called him up and said, hey, can I come learn from you? Because I was looking, do I want to go learn construction or on brick crew? But I realized literally no one in the country is doing what he's doing. And realizing like, okay, I want to work for this guy. And he said yes, and went down and kind of tested out a week. And I was like, can I stay? And so ended up apprenticing. And he had just moved to Carlton Landing from Georgia. And so I ended up staying and apprenticing for 2 years, laying brick, building, homes, because he really did. He's a true artist, and he had actually studied in college oil painting and sculpting. And so he really thought about masonry as a form of sculpting, because it's all these little pixels. Now, when you're doing a veneer, you can't really sculpt these really thin layers. You can't create big negatives. You can't kind of extrude out or do what we call corbelling, which is one of the reasons why all this old architecture is so much more beautiful. Yes, there's design, but there's also design enabled by the structural masonry that you can't do in modern building. So I spent 2 years learning, heads down, just fully integrated into that. And then also thinking about design and teaching myself design, because I needed to figure out how to make a living after my apprenticeship, which didn't pay a whole lot of money, $12 an hour, how to make money after that. And so I started teaching myself design. That might sound funny to people, because I would have never thought I could teach myself design, but there's architecture school, all these things that I thought about going to. And what I learned was when you start learning traditional materials like masonry and timber framing, there's certain kind of mechanics and laws, the tectonics of how it works, and it works in compression. And when you start actually understanding that, and then you start understanding, well, this is why buildings kind of look the way they do, and there's proportions, there's arches that look like this and not like this, and the buttressing looks like this and not like this. So practical experience combined with, I didn't have a ton of experience, so I needed to design simple buildings that I could fully wrap my head around and kind of execute on my own. So I started designing simple rectangles. Like literally most of my buildings were rectangles or rectangle based, just really simple. But then realizing, holy crap, you can create a really beautiful rectangular building. And then once again, drive around your neighborhood. How many just kind of like pure rectangles are there? There aren't very many, because people try to introduce interest and all kinds of things. I'm not saying everything should be a rectangle. I just mean I would rather have a simple, well-proportioned, with good materials rectangle than a complex building with a bunch of corners and roof lines and stuff like that. So that was kind of my origins, being fully immersed into architecture and building.
That's really cool. For anybody who doesn't know, what is Carlton Landing, and what was your experience like living there?
So Carlton Landing is a new urbanist town, if anyone knows what that term is, or a walkable neighborhood a couple hours from Oklahoma City on Lake Eufaula. And it was really inspired by, the developer was inspired by Seaside, where they used to go down to. So Seaside is a neighborhood in Florida, and you should look it up if you've never been there or don't know what it is. And the whole idea is, what is a walkable neighborhood? Well, because you're like, well, I might have sidewalks in my neighborhood. You can go down just any kind of like main highway or something, and there's sidewalks. But is there anyone walking no, because it's not just about having a sidewalk, it's about having somewhere to walk to and a reason to walk. And also, that walk needs to be beautiful. And so it's a different way of thinking about neighbors because this is really just a neighborhood. When I say a walkable neighborhood, it's full of single family detached homes, but those homes are arranged in a different way. They're a bit closer to the street. They all have front porches, there's sidewalks, the landscaping is done well, and it kind of creates this civic realm. And there's lots of public space and lots of parks. There's also different typologies, and of course, this is more, it's not in a city, so there's less, big buildings or townhomes or things, but there are townhomes and there are sixplexes, and there's a condo building, an apartment building, and then there's a coffee shop there and a pizza shop. And that was early on. I mean, I was there when there was 40 houses back in 2015. There's like 300 or 400 now, and it's growing, and it's changed a lot since I've been there. But what was so cool about living there, I lived there with my wife in my late 20s into my early 30s. We didn't have kids at the time, and we were the youngest people there. I was apprenticing. We didn't have any money. We were living in the garage apartment, but we still talk about how we knew more people while living there than we had since college. Why? Like, what? Like, how does that even work? Because most of the people were in their 30s with kids or older, 40s, 50s, 60s, even retirees. But we had like all these friends and we never made plans. I swear we could probably count on like two hands in 5 years how many times we made like official plans, like we're going to meet Wednesday night at 5 p.m. Even though that's how like normal life for Americans is every single day. Everything is planned. Everything you have to drive to. You got to schedule your kids' play dates. You got to schedule your dates with your friends. You got to schedule the time to go play the sports. And Carlton Landing, we just have a chat group and be like, hey, you want to go play spike ball? Want to go play volleyball? Want to go by the lake? You just be walking down, see people. And I had all these loose connections. It's what helped me understand community isn't having a bunch of best friends. We're all busy. There's only so much time you have to have a really deep relationship. But the reason we don't really have communities in the US, communities, because we don't actually have a coherent, like loose connections where you see people regularly over time, the coffee shop barista multiple times a week, the pizza shop owner multiple times a week, the neighbors that you might not be great friends with, but you see them walking, play at the park. And what's cool about it is you don't have to share everything in common to have a really strong relationship when it's like that. And so it helped me understand that wow, the stuff I had been reading about new urbanism, all of this, it's real. When you get the hardware right, the built environment right, it lets a different type of life, a different type of software unfold.
Yeah, for sure. In terms of getting into new urbanism, like what kinds of books did you read? What kinds of resources did you seek out as you were kind of becoming interested in that?
Suburban Nation is the book that I read. Suburban Nation, The Rise of Sprawl and Decline of the American Dream. It was by Jeff Speck and Andres Dewani and Elizabeth Plater-Zyberg. That is such a good, if you're like new to this topic and you don't know what we're talking about, that book is like so helpful to understanding what the world used to look like, what it looks like now, why it looks this way, kind of this regulatory burden that's been imposed on the built environment, and that this is not a free market product where we live, and it's also not good for people and all this kind of stuff. So it's kind of the take the blindfold off moment for me when I read that. But then I followed up pretty quickly with Christopher Alexander and pattern language, which got me obsessed with this idea of just, he's like a philosopher builder, he's like the Wendell-Berry of architecture. And then also you mentioned Jane Jacobs. That was one of my early reads, her Death and Life of Great American Cities. And then the other one I would say is Leon Creer and his book, Architecture Community. I would say those four books were like my pillars, and I was completely red pilled after that. I was such a hardcore believer by the time I had finished those books, studied things, visited places, lived in Carlton Landing. I was like, I want to be part of creating a world where everyone that wants to can live in a neighborhood in a community like this. And our cities really could be just repeated neighborhoods like this with nodes and centers and fabric, and our cities could really be set up differently than how we have them set up. And I think people would be happier, they would be healthier, they'd be more well connected, kids could roam freely, elderly could age in place. It would be a far more sustainable practice. It could be far more beautiful. It would be far more economically resilient. Strong towns was another one later, but taught me that, where there's really an economic argument to all of this too.
Yeah, definitely. I think we kind of have followed similar paths to get to a similar place. I'm curious, in terms of moving to Oklahoma City and starting to work in Oklahoma City, what are some of the projects that you've been most excited about, and what has your perception been of, Oklahoma City coming from Houston and then Carlton Landing and other places.
When I first got to Oklahoma City from Carlton Landing, we weren't actually planning to stay here because I'm not from here. My wife's from Pittsburgh. It was more like it was the next step to go to try to build up a business and then move somewhere like Nashville or Austin or Raleigh where it was really happening, like somewhere really exciting. But after being here a few years, it was like, whoa, Oklahoma City's one, really cool. Two, it's a great place to live. But three, it almost felt like Austin before Austin became Austin, like 20 years before Austin became what it is, or 25, whatever it is. And I saw the opportunity where there's all sorts of cool things starting to happen. And we're at kind of the right cultural and political moment where there's zoning code reform, which is it nearly as far as I would take it? No, but at least you're starting to shift that regulatory environment. Planners are starting to get on board. You've got a strong ULI group here that's more kind of new urbanist in thinking, and realizing, oh my gosh, we want to stay here. One, to just raise our family and all of that, but really to participate in the building of Oklahoma City and really feeling like we could have a major impact here in terms of shifting even the trajectory of the direction that Oklahoma City is going compared to Houston or Austin or Nashville, where it's kind of like it's too late. Like it's just all built out and it's endless suburban sprawl, and you could put a great project and it would be a spec. And so there's just a lot of great, interesting things about Oklahoma, and there's beauty here. And then ultimately, it's like, well, I just want to make something in my backyard and dig in and spend the rest of my life investing in it, making it better. In terms of projects we're excited about, I got a slow start because when we moved here, it was like literally April 2020. And guess what? COVID happened. And I was new to the city, trying to build some houses. Supply chains blew up. I couldn't get my brick for 12 months. On my first, I had $150,000 into a couple lots and called my brick on order. And it went from, hey, we're going to deliver it because it had already been an order to, oh, it's a 12-month lead time. And I need my brick to do anything. And you're just going like, what? So it took me 3 years just to like make it through and survive. And I mean, barely survive. But thankfully, I did survive, have been growing a team, and we've got some really amazing people, and we'll continue to grow. We're still a small team, 6 people, but now we're starting to get into development. We've done some small development before, but this is really kind of the ultimate vision of where I've been trying to get to. So it's just been 10 years since I laid my first brick, really like almost exactly. It was November 2015 when I laid my first brick. So we're at 10 years. It's taken me 10 years to kind of get here and to really understand how to build houses, how to run a business, how to sell things, how to grow a team, how to do small developments. And my vision is really to be a vertically integrated developer or a holistic development company, because usually you have architecture over here, builder GC over here, developer over here. The developer raises the money, puts the deal together, hires the architect, bids it out to the GCs. And I see a lot of kind of there could be a better way to do things because there's a lot of like siloing there, and the developer ultimately controls what happens because it's their vision. They're the ones raising the money, answerable to investors, answerable to the bank. And thankfully, this is where my CPA background, accounting, at least has helped me some. And so the project we are most excited about, we've been working on for 2.5 years, is an acre in downtown Edmond, which is a suburb of Oklahoma City, but it's only 20 minutes. It's got this old, cool, historic downtown that's starting to really revitalize. And an acre doesn't sound like very much, but when you start thinking about building an urban environment and shaping space with your buildings, you can do a lot. So we're fitting 18 townhomes, 2 live works, and then 13,000 square feet of mixed use commercial. And this is all 2-story. Some of them are 3-story, 2 and 3-story. And so I call this human scale. And so instead of just saying, we got an acre, we're going to plop a big building on there and, put 20 units or something. And by the way, there's actually nothing wrong with that. We will do that sometimes. But when you start creating this fine-grained urban fabric, and it's hard, to describe in a podcast, but all these townhomes and things create these outdoor spaces and courtyards and gardens that is just really a wonderful experience, and it feels so much bigger than an acre. And is this project for everyone? No, because this is someone looking to live in an urban environment, and their options right now are either a big multifamily apartment building of 300 units or like a condo tower with like a flat and an elevator and structured parking. And so we're saying, let's bring a neighborhood feel to urban infill and a placemaking feel. And so we like developing in walkable areas, because I have a thesis that, and this is kind of proven, but just walkable real estate is the most valuable real estate across the country. If we start building within walkable areas, I don't have to worry about competitors doing another project in the same area, because the more walkability, the more supply of walkability, the more demand, because the area becomes more desirable. There's more options, there's more businesses, there's more vitality. And so we're really thinking long term about it, not like a quick flip, like, hey, let's just build this in 3 years, 5 years, we're going to get out and generate a 20% IRR, which is typically, and I know this is not necessarily a real estate development podcast, but most real estate is based on a quick exit. And so it's kind of like value engineering for this 5 year exit and kind of extracting as much as you can. And I believe we can run a profitable business, make money for our investors while making the community better. So I call it like regenerative architecture, rather than extractive architecture, it's regenerative development that enriches everything. It's like the difference between a monolithic soybean field or cornfield where monoculture versus a regenerative farm that actually, rather than depleting the soil gets better over time. And it's this closed loop system. And this is our first project. We're already looking at a second one of a similar scale of 26 to 28 townhomes. That'll all be more market rate. The one we're building right now is pretty expensive. It's kind of like our flagship project, but we have an interest in working at different economic ends of affordability.
That project you're talking about is the Townsend, right?
Yes.
I've also heard you talk about recently, you've had a little bit of a change of tune when it comes to like everything should be structural masonry versus like there are times when it should be and there are times when it shouldn't be because of practical reasons and economics and all of that. So I'm curious, like, how are you addressing that decision now from project to project? And what are the deciding factors when it comes to like what structural system you're going to use on a project?
I've got a two-part answer to this question. I used to be very purist and be like, everything should be triple wide structural masonry, blah, blah, blah. Like stick framing, wood framing shouldn't exist. I've really changed my tune on this, and that a city needs to be able to grow and evolve organically. And there is a whole lot of value to quick and cheap housing. And I don't mean that in a derogatory term. I mean, stick framing and using 2x4s, 2x6s, plywood, all this is a really brilliant system enabled by lumber mills and mass produced nails. And when you're needing to build quickly and you're needing to put up quick and cheap housing like after World War II, there is absolutely a place for that. And they're not meant to last forever. And most cities throughout history have had that as a huge component. That was most of the cities. Like Florence didn't start out as a bunch of beautiful masonry buildings. They were cobbled together shacks because people were poor. But then as a city grew in wealth and stability and kind of that urban fabric started to solidify, they would rebuild out of structural masonry. And it's kind of like saying, hey, now we're ready. This place is mature. Let's actually kind of put the final product in here. Not saying it will never, ever, ever, ever change. But at the same time, you've kind of run the experience. You know what's working. You know what areas are. You've let kind of the organic nature unfold. And then it's time to kind of like set that a little more permanently. And so I think cities, healthy cities, ideally, right, and this is my ideal, would have both, where you've got quick and cheap, metal buildings sometimes, but then eventually can evolve into this long-lasting, durable structural masonry. Now, being the wealthiest country in the history of the world, we should have way more structural masonry than we have. And there's other building systems too, but what I mean by that is really way more of our buildings should be highly durable buildings. There's a couple reasons we don't. One, we've just forgotten. Literally since World War II, we stopped building structural masonry for various reasons. But now people don't even know what I'm talking about. And masons aren't really masons anymore. They're bricklayers. And there's a difference. And I don't mean that in a derogatory term. It's just the trade, the knowledge has been lost. But thankfully, it's not hard to do. It just takes some knowledge. But then because it's kind of died off and it's a specialty, it's also more expensive. And unfortunately, too, there's some cultural factors here, but we really, in America, for at least a while, have valued quantity over quality. When the average house in the U.S. is 2,500 square feet, yet 78% of the U.S. is a 1 to 3 person household, as in 77% of households are 3 people or less, yet the average house size is 2,500 square feet. I'm not saying there shouldn't be 2,500 square feet houses. Of course there should. But when the average is that big, you're going, why could we not build smaller and better? So we kind of have that value as we're like, hey, we're not saying you should spend more in a house than you can afford. It's like, let's build a little bit smaller, but do it thoughtfully and build it better. The reason we can't build everything we do out of structural masonry is cost. And part of that's just because it's a lost trade. And so anytime you're doing something different, it's going to be more expensive. Stick framing is not just cheap because stick framing is inherently cheap. It's because an entire industry has been working to make it cheaper for 100 years or longer, actually. So it's a very, 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 very efficient system where vendors and trades and all this know how to do it quickly. So there's kind of that lost knowledge part. And then also, it cost us about 50% more to build today than it did in 2020. As in, the inflation during COVID was so utterly dramatic that pre-COVID, we kind of could build everything out of structural masonry because people kind of could afford that difference easier, even though there was a premium on it. But now housing in general is just so expensive. Well, I guess I won't use the name of who it is, but a volume builder we were talking to recently, their entry level home from 2020 was $300,000 in Oklahoma. Now it's $425,000, the exact same home. When you print $6 trillion, that's just what happens. The prices of things go up and they don't go away because you didn't actually make anything cheaper. So how we actually decide what we build out of structural masonry or not is ultimately what people are willing to pay for. So at Townsend, we're building our commercial that we're going to keep long-term with our investors all out of structural masonry because we're having these really cool professional offices and workspaces in here. And we feel like we can generate the money to justify that premium. And also there's some benefits with IBC buildings and fire codes and firewalls when you're doing all masonry and they're attached buildings. When it comes to the townhomes, we are doing wood framing and we're going to build a quality building because you can build a quality stick frame building. It just is actually expensive to do so. Like most stick frame buildings are not actually quality built. They're actually cheap, like poorly built, I might say, where you're going to have rot issues and mold issues and other things. So it's expensive to build a wood frame building in a quality way, but it's still cheaper than structural masonry. So that's what we're going to do. But we hope to give people the option. If anyone wants a structural masonry house and is willing to pay the difference, we'll do it, but you kind of have to put it on the consumer at some point because I've been too much of a purist about it for too long. That's why our company is called Building Culture. It's partly about the construction culture, but it's also about building culture because it's about people valuing things and learning to think about things in a different way.
You also mentioned that a lot of the historic buildings that we kind of cherish, even here in Oklahoma, are made of this historic masonry, which does have like different properties than the brick that we use today. So I'm curious, I've seen that you've gotten involved with specifically a historic preservation project, the Jewel Theater. I actually had Vanessa on the podcast last week talking about that project as well. So what kind of like expertise are you like bringing to the table there, having worked with structural masonry, and like what have you learned from historic buildings that you've kind of applied to your work as well?
The number one thing is old brick are very soft compared to modern brick. Modern brick are fired at 6,000 psi, 9,000 psi. If I'm going to get a little nerdy, your standard concrete outside is like 4,000 psi in a driveway or something like that. Old brick might be under 1,000 psi because they weren't kiln dried as hard because they just didn't have the technology. People always tend to think like old brick are so much better. That's actually not always true. And I like old stuff. But I'm saying like that's just not always true. Some brick are called salmon brick and they're super soft and they're meant to be interior brick and not exterior brick. And they'll kind of fall apart in weather and in a cold climate. The number one thing when you're restoring a historic building is the mortar. When you're doing new construction, you can get away with this Portland-based mortar that's type N, type S, something like that. There's lots of arguments that you can still say lime mortar is way better. I think it is. But you're not going to damage the brick. Old buildings, if you go and tuck point it, and when I say tuck point it, a lot of the masonry pairs, you've got all these layers of brick, mortar, brick, mortar, brick, mortar. And that mortar is the sacrificial element, as in you want to protect the brick so that mortar is softer. But over time, that mortar starts to kind of like wear away. And then you start getting more water into your building. And then freeze thaw cycles happen. Your mortar deterioration happens faster, etc. So the first thing you need to do is basically weatherproof your building by re-tuck pointing everything. But a lot of masons, unfortunately, will come back and just tuck it with a type N Portland-based mortar or type S Portland-based mortar, and it will literally destroy the brick. It will spall off the brick, and you can go look around Oklahoma City, and you'll see this, I would say it's like a dark gray mortar. When you see that, and you'll kind of see like patches where it's like you've got a more tan mortar, and then it's just like stark battleship gray mortar. And then look to see if any of the brick are spalling. And if they aren't yet, they will. When it says spalling, the outside's kind of like pop off. Because now your mortar is harder and your brick is absorbing the moisture. And when it freezes, the brick pops off rather than the mortar. So we're pretty fanatical about using the right mortar when you're doing historic preservation or working on any kind of historic building. That's probably like the number one thing, like by far and above. And then I would say you've got to be really careful if you're insulating a structural masonry building because, I know everyone loves energy efficiency is important to us too, but there's a lot of other variables to think about, particularly with structural masonry, because it's a vapor open wall system that the brick is shedding most of the water, but then it's absorbing water into the walls because brick is a porous material. If you drop a dry brick in a bucket of water, pull it out, it'll be heavier because it's absorbed water. And that's how these walls are meant to work. They soak in some water, it distributes them throughout the wall, and it dries from both sides. If you insulate one side and you don't do it properly, that moisture is going to get trapped. And once it gets trapped, even though masonry is very resilient and far less vulnerable to water than, say, wood is, you still don't want a bunch of water in your walls, especially if it's staying there, especially in freeze-thaw cycles. And so people will make the mistake of putting spray foam on the walls or kind of air sealing that wall, and you don't want to do that. And so sometimes it really is better to leave your walls uninsulated because you still have this 12 inches of thermal mass and protect the building first. And then I think lastly, just understanding kind of how masonry works and compression and just having been around it and done a lot of things for 10 years. And, hey, a crack does not mean the building's falling down. All masonry cracks over time. Things like that, where it's like, how do you pull out a wall and do it safely? How do you pull out a beam and do it safely? That kind of stuff.
Definitely. I've only worked on a couple of historic preservation type projects at this point, and I've already run into some of those things.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting. In terms of Carlton Landing is obviously kind of the first in Oklahoma, but I've been seeing more and more of these like new urbanist developments. Wheeler District is a major one, of course, as well here in Oklahoma City. But there's even like way down south of Norman, is it Selah? Is that?
Yeah, I say Selah, but everyone says it
Selah?
differently, so I can't promise.
And then I've even seen like recently they've announced they're doing some stuff up in Edmond, like out to the east, even like in Tulsa, like south of Catoosa. There's a new one that they've kind of announced. So and what's interesting to me, and I'd like to hear your take on this as well, is how the different like completely rural like Carlton Landing versus like the much more urban Wheeler District and the more exurban with rural feel of Selah. It's interesting how they all kind of follow the same principles of new urbanism and walkability, but they kind of have this different context to them and a different kind of target demographic. What do you think about like the applications of new urbanism and the different contexts in which it can kind of exist?
Yeah, I haven't figured out something better to call it, but like new urbanism, it's not the best branding in my mind. I'm just like, I wish because it makes people think it's new, or something. And I get what they were intending with it. And it's been an amazing movement that's done a tremendous amount of good work. But really what new urban is in some ways, it's like getting back to this idea of first principles thinking about city building, where it's like, here's kind of the base layer of truths, you could say, that need to be true to make a coherent community. And those same principles can be applied in different applications, in different areas, in different levels of density, and they can all look different. They can all be substantially varying levels of density, yet still create this sense of place, community, beauty, walkability, living your life in a smaller radius, things like that. And so, Carlton Landing and Sailor, and I guess it's actually not like Serenbe in Georgia for anyone. It's like worth looking into. It's even more kind of agrarian, you could say, but they're still mixing the ingredients of kind of a diverse range of housing is really important, where you don't just have 2-bedroom houses or just 4-bedroom houses or just $300,000 houses or just $800,000 houses. You want a mix of these things. And then you also want to have apartments and things if you can. Obviously, that's going to vary a whole lot depending on where you are. Carlton Landing is mostly single family detached housing versus Wheeler is about to open up a 270 unit apartment building, which is awesome. But it also has a lot of single family detached as well. So there's a lot of ways to apply new urbanism. And really, I think one of the key things, because urbanism is also this term I've been struggling with, because it's just not, I don't feel like it's a great word to describe what we're talking about. And I don't know if it's just because it makes people think of something that because people hear urbanism and they immediately think like extreme density. Now, there is a level of density, but like we're not talking about Manhattan. And also Paris is dense, but it's 50,000 people a square mile. But also Amsterdam is walkable and it's like 16,000 people a square mile. Wheeler is even less than that, but it's also walkable. And I really think about it as urbanism is spatial. And this was a guy on our team that really helped me, our lead urban designer. Like he's really helped me kind of understand this and sense this. Like you can create urbanism with a garden wall, with a row of trees in terms of creating spaces and connecting things and giving people something to walk against, walk alongside. People don't want to be in the middle of a field. They want a sense of coherent space. They want to be able to see someone's face across the sidewalk. And so you can still have large lots in these types of communities. There's space for that too. It's just a matter of why are we saying only big houses here or only small houses here? You can do it in a really wonderful, beautiful way that lets people move within the community, that justifies working on your house and expanding your house over time or doing a remodel. Because guess what? If you're in a neighborhood of all $300,000 homes and you go do a 50,000 kitchen remodel or do a bedroom extension of 500 square foot, master bedroom extension, you're going to lose money because the appraisals and the comps say, well, all the other houses are $300,000. So your house isn't worth, we can't appraise your house at 370,000 just because you did this. So when you actually create this more dynamic neighborhood, people can actually live, expand, grow, take care of their houses, all of that. So it just unlocks so much.
Yeah, I think me and my fiance Katie went down to Sela recently just to drive around because I was curious. And as soon as we drove in, she was like, "Well, this is awesome." And she's not like a country person, like she's a city girl, but she was like, "I have so many family members who would love to live in a place like this that like there's like a vineyard, there's like longhorns wandering around, but it's still got this sense of community. It's got this like, little pizza place that there's people walking around." And she was even like, they need to put in a dirt bike track for the kids.
That'd be a good idea.
Yeah, it's so cool to see how these principles can be applied in not only just like the high density downtown core of your city, but like really anywhere.
Yeah.
So what kinds of projects are you looking at pursuing in the future with building culture, if you're allowed to say anything?
Yeah. I won't say too much about one that we're actively kind of like under contract on the land and are looking at, but I'll just tell you the main thing that we're looking at is we might, buy a lot in an kind of a growing walkable. Once again, we're saying like, let's look at walkable. I am interested in greenfield, like doing a greenfield neighborhood, but it's like if I could have one greenfield neighborhood and then do the rest infill, that would be kind of my ideal. But to do greenfield, you need a whole lot of capital. I mean, you're talking a 20 to 30 year project, maybe longer to really build something out. And you're going to be 10 years before you really have what I call MVP, like minimum viable place where it really feels like a coherent neighborhood. And so it's a really long game. Hopefully we can get to that point where we're doing one of those around here or involved with one. We might, go to a mixed use building off just a lot off a nice street if it made sense. But really, when you can start putting together 3/4 of an acre or more in a growing walkable area, which is hard to do, but totally possible. And, whether it's Paseo or Plaza District or Auto Alley or, downtown Edmond or downtown Oklahoma City or Midtown. I mean, there's lots of places that have this just budding core. If you can get 3/4 of an acre or more, and I really kind of like the acre, you can create a sense of place within itself. People use the word pocket neighborhood, which I actually quite like that term, pocket neighborhood, where you're creating this kind of coherent community within a larger community. So I'm like, we're really about placemaking, where it's like, I live at Townsend, which is in downtown Edmond, and both of those are good things, where we're additive to the life around it, and more projects we do around are additive. And I really, like I said, I want to concentrate our efforts in areas so the entire area gets more walkable. And we're really interested in doing, I think townhomes are very interesting, both kind of rental townhomes and for sale townhomes. I really think human scale commercial, that 2 to 4 story is just really, really nice, and small bay commercial. I really want to build some, like, any wealthy people out there listening, some like awesome, cool wine bars or restaurants or iconic libraries or something like that, where you're like, hey, we're just going to go all out and make something great, like the First National or something like that, because we can build stuff like that from scratch. We can do these great things again. We can actually give people vision of creating just like a stunning city and things we can all kind of look in awe. And so I use the term sometimes architecture worth celebrating. I love fabric buildings too. Most cities, the great cities, are mostly fabric buildings with, 2% punctuation, 2% punctuation being the cathedrals, the grand libraries, the government buildings, whatever it is. And so we want to build some of that iconic architecture too that really makes people look up with wonder, while also building out the fabric of our cities. And I heard someone say this recently where they're like, I want to see in kind of our city environment more strollers than dogs. And it's not because this person's anti-dog. It's just that we built our cities in the way, if you're a family, you almost have to move to the suburbs unless you're really going to fight it. And I say have to, that's a bit of an extreme word. There's nothing built for you in the city. Not really. And so I want to build family friendly stuff that makes living in the city wonderful, safe, beautiful, in a real community.
I'm imagining basically your great grandchildren should be able to look and say, my great grandfather built this building. And I kind of joke about this sometimes, but like they used to put like the name of whoever built the building and like the year in stone. So if anybody's going to bring that back, I think it would be you.
My mentor did that. He put little cornerstones in, these granite cornerstones in the brick, and his name, and on some of them we have our name, or I have my name on some of them. And we've done that on a few of our buildings too, and plan to do that even at our Townsend project with all the major contributors. So not just our team, but a lot of the key trades we've worked with, and even our capital partners. And that sounds funny, but I actually think it's important when you think about all the old great buildings, they were sponsored by patrons, because wealthy people aren't bad. I know this is something I've been playing with, is like, rather than like hating on wealthy people, we want them to participate in building a great city. And I don't mean it as kind of like a trick. I'm like, heck yeah, let's put their name on it. Like, I would love to do that and leave a legacy for you. This is part of your legacy. The capital is so key in all of this. It's not just the know-how. It's not just the regulations. It's not just these things that we talk about a lot. If you don't get the capital, and it's really hard to raise money for these projects, is why I'm talking about it, because like the system isn't really set up from it. You can't just go to a bank or get institutional capital, which tends to fund these bigger projects. You're really raising them from like individuals and stuff, like $100,000 at a time or $50,000 at a time. And so I think we want to celebrate that and like invite people to make their own city better. And I think that's a really exciting investment, rather than just putting your 100K in a REIT or something like that. And it's like, who knows what it built, It's like, well, let me go build this thing in my own city that I get to look at. I get to enjoy, my grandkids are going to go look at and have a sense of pride about it. So that's really important to me too.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys get up to next. Where can people follow you and your work if they're interested?
If you want to follow, we're not doing a ton of social media right now, but we will when we start doing Townsend. And so our Instagram at Building Culture, Instagram will be a great place. My kind of personal, where I just give you my own thoughts or whatever, is X, Twitter. So at Austin Tunnell. And those are the two main places we share right now. We also have the Building Culture podcast. We also, you can go to our website, buildingculture.com, and check us out as well.
That's awesome. Austin, thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to probably having you back on at some point in the future.
Sounds great, Kyler. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, it's me, Kyler. If you enjoyed this conversation, please be sure to give the show a like, rating, subscription, or whatever kind of nice feedback you can provide on whatever platform you're watching or listening from. If you'd like to join our community to stay up to date or to discuss anything you heard in today's show, consider joining the Eryngo Urbanism Discord server. And finally, if you'd like to support the work of Eryngo Urbanism directly, you can do so over on Patreon. Until next time.